What if the real villains are the ones you least expect? The shocking truth behind this injustice is buried deeper than you think. The courtroom was packed. The air was filled with the smugness of those who thought they had won. In the dock, a policeman sat back, arms crossed over his chest, eyes filled with disdain. He was used to hearings like this, a black woman suing the police. It had happened 100 times, and the result was always the same. She would lose. But today, he did not know that he was facing the biggest mistake of his life. The woman before him was no stranger. She was neither an ordinary citizen nor a small lawyer. She was the most powerful person in this room. And in just a few minutes, everything he thought he had under his belt would come crashing down. Thank you for being here. If you like this content, please click like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next meaningful stories. Tomorrow, we will have another meaningful story for you. Jefferson County Courthouse. A sweltering Monday morning, Courtroom 4 was packed, not only with the parties involved, but also with reporters. They had heard about the case and knew that it could become a media firestorm. In the middle of the room, Olivia Carter sat upright at the plaintiff's table. She wore a formal navy suit, had curly black hair, a calm face, but sharp eyes. On the defense's side, Officer David Reynolds leaned back in his chair, legs crossed, eyes full of arrogance. He was a tall, white man in his mid-40s, with what he considered an authoritative presence. To him, this was just another legal hassle that he would eventually overcome, thanks to his connections in the field. Sitting next to him was his defense attorney, Benjamin Dawson, a gray-haired man who was used to these kinds of cases. He made no effort to hide his disdain for Olivia, even appearing distracted when the judge entered the room. The trial began. Judge Kingston's voice rang out, pulling everyone back to reality. As the trial progressed, Reynolds could not hide his arrogance. He kept glancing at Olivia, occasionally smirking as she spoke. He believed that a black woman like her had no chance against him. As Olivia presented her argument about being treated unfairly by the police force, Reynolds suddenly burst into laughter, shaking his head in mockery. "Oh, that's a shame. A woman should feel hurt because the police did their job," Reynolds said, emphasizing the word woman in a derogatory way. The courtroom stirred slightly at his words. Judge Kingston frowned but did not admonish him. Olivia remained calm, her hands clasped lightly on the table. But Reynolds didn't stop there. He continued, this time with an even more sarcastic tone. "Maybe you should watch less dramas. We don't have time to deal with people who like to play the victim," he said. Dawson, his lawyer, nudged him to be quiet, but Reynolds shrugged. In his mind, the case was going nowhere. Olivia remained silent, but her gaze sharpened. She knew Reynolds's type well, people accustomed to power who thought they were above the law. But she also knew that today would be the day he learned the truth. As the trial continued, the plaintiffs presented evidence. Olivia provided audio and video recordings that proved Reynolds had abused his power in the past, but he remained arrogant, even crossing his arms and smirking as the tapes were shown. Judge Kingston said, "Lieutenant Reynolds, I advise you to maintain a professional demeanor in the courtroom." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "I just find it hard to believe this is a serious case, Judge." At this point, the judge spoke. Her voice was calm but sharp. "Do you really think you can sit here and mock justice without consequences?" Reynolds sneered. "I just find it funny that someone like you thinks you can overthrow me." A silence fell over the courtroom. Olivia tilted her head slightly, her lips curling into a meaningful smile. "I guess we'll know the answer soon enough." The room fell silent as the judge declared a recess before entering into further arguments. As the trial resumed after the recess, Olivia remained calm, but what puzzled those in the courtroom was the look in her eyes. There was no anxiety, no fear, but instead, an absolute confidence. She had seen David Reynolds' kind too many times in her career. Cops who looked down on people of color, thinking their power was invincible. But today, he had picked the wrong person to confront. "Plaintiff, would you like to continue your presentation?" Judge Kingston asked. Olivia stood up and walked toward the podium. She placed her hands on the table, her eyes scanning the room. "Your Honor, this case is not simply a civil dispute. It reflects a larger problem, abuses of power in the police force, especially racial discrimination that has been covered up for too long." Reynolds leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. He turned to Dawson, tilting his chin as if to say, "What is she doing?" But Olivia paid no attention to him. She continued, "Lieutenant David Reynolds not only violated my civil rights, but has a long history of abusing his power, targeting people of color. The evidence I am about to present will show that." A murmur ran through the courtroom. The reporters in the back row began taking notes more quickly. The name David Reynolds was familiar to anyone who followed police abuse, but no one had ever seen him brought to justice like this. Reynolds still smirked. "Really? What proof do you have?" Olivia turned to her team of lawyers. One of them held up a thick file. She opened the first page and pulled out a document. "Your Honor, this is an internal police report on Lieutenant Reynolds. It documents 7 civil lawsuits against him in the past 5 years, all of which were dismissed before they ever got to trial." The whispering started again. Reynolds snorted. "Being dismissed means I did nothing wrong." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Or do you have someone covering for you?" Judge Kingston banged his gavel. Silence in the courtroom. Olivia turned to the next page. "And here's a recording from one of his victims, a black driver who was pulled over for no reason." She pressed the button. A voice came from the speaker. "I asked why I was stopped, and he just laughed, said I looked suspicious. I didn't do anything wrong, but he still searched my car, said derogatory things about my skin color." Reynolds suddenly stiffened. Olivia looked him straight in the eye. "This is just one of many cases." Reynolds put his hands on the table. "You're trying to tear me down with baseless claims." Judge Kingston said sternly, "Lieutenant Reynolds, if you continue to interrupt, I will call in the judicial police." Reynolds gritted his teeth, but Olivia could see his hands clenched in anger. "You think you can always get away with it? Today is the day you realize you were wrong," Olivia said, her voice cold. The whole courtroom was silent. The atmosphere became tense and stifling. Olivia remained standing at the podium, her eyes piercing, as if she could see through David Reynolds' arrogant facade. The white police officer began to lose his initial confidence. He was no longer smiling, but instead, his expression was torn between confusion and anger. The documents and recordings Olivia had just presented had thrown Reynolds off balance. He turned to his lawyer, Benjamin Dawson, as if expecting an intervention. But Dawson merely shrugged, for he too had realized the tide was turning. "Your Honor," Olivia continued, her voice calm but authoritative, "Lieutenant Reynolds thought he could abuse his power, insult, and trample on the honor of others without being held accountable. But today, I want everyone here to witness the truth." She paused, placing one hand on the table. Her eyes scanned each person in the courtroom. "Because I am not an ordinary citizen who has been treated unfairly. I am not a victim who can be easily threatened, and I am certainly not someone you can ignore." The air froze for a moment. Then Olivia pulled an ID card from her vest pocket and held it up for the entire courtroom to see. Inspector General of the United States Police, the badge gleamed under the lights. The whole courtroom was silent. Judge Kingston's eyes widened, his mouth slightly open as if he couldn't believe his ears. Reporters immediately grabbed their phones and cameras, recording the moment. Some in the audience took a deep breath, as if they had just witnessed an unbelievable reversal. "What about Reynolds?" He turned pale. Every drop of blood drained from his face as he stared at the ID card in Olivia's hand. No way," he muttered. Olivia kept her slight but murderous smile. "Do you understand now, Lieutenant Reynolds?" she said slowly. "You just mocked the head of the police investigation force, and you think you're going to get away with it?" Reynolds shook his head as if still unable to accept the truth. "No, this is a joke. I don't believe it." Olivia turned to Judge Kingston. "Your Honor, I formally request that the court investigate Lieutenant Reynolds' entire record and order his immediate suspension to prevent him from manipulating evidence." Judge Kingston was still trying to regain his composure. He blinked a few times, then stared at Reynolds, now looking more like a criminal than a powerful police officer. Finally, he slammed the hammer down. "The court accepts Inspector General Carter's recommendation. Lieutenant David Reynolds, you are hereby placed on administrative leave pending an investigation." The courtroom fell silent. No one said a word. Even the reporters, who were always on the lookout for the most sensational news, paused, as if they had just witnessed a historic moment. David Reynolds sat frozen in the defendant's chair. His face was as white as blood. Before, He had been arrogant and contemptuous of Olivia Carter as an unknown black woman. But now, knowing her true identity, he felt a chill run down his spine. Judge Kingston gently removed his glasses, placed them on the table, and looked straight at Olivia with a look of surprise in his eyes. Miss Carter, no. Chief Inspector Carter, he corrected himself. I think we need to hear your statement more clearly. Olivia nodded slightly. She stepped slowly up to the witness stand, but her eyes remained locked on Reynolds. Judge Kingston, she said, her voice calm but with undeniable authority. I am not here simply as a witness, she continued. I am here as one of the people responsible for overseeing and inspecting the internal operations of the police force. Reynolds took a deep breath, sweat beading on his forehead. Olivia continued. Lieutenant David Reynolds engaged in a series of abusive, racist, and falsified reports to cover up his illegal actions. A loud commotion broke out in the courtroom. Judge Kingston banged his gavel on the table, signaling for order. Olivia didn't take her eyes off Reynolds. As the head of the inspection team, I have been monitoring his activities for many months. All the evidence of his abuse of power has been collected. At this point, Defense Attorney Dawson stood up, trying to maintain a professional appearance. Objection. This is not a trial of David Reynolds, but a trial regarding my client's conduct. Olivia turned to him, smiling. I'm afraid you are mistaken, Attorney Dawson, she said, because during our investigation, we also uncovered your own wrongdoing. We have ample evidence that you repeatedly helped Reynolds and his associates conceal their crimes, falsified evidence, and even intimidated witnesses. Dawson's face changed instantly. This is a fabrication, he stammered. Olivia looked at the marshal standing nearby. Gentlemen, please arrest Attorney Dawson on charges of obstruction of justice. Two policemen approached immediately. Dawson tried to say something, but seconds later, he was handcuffed, to the shock of everyone. Reynolds lost his composure at this point. He jumped up from the defendant's chair, slamming his hands on the table. You can't do this to me. I have rights. I'm a policeman, he shouted. Olivia stared at him, her eyes cold. No, you are not a man of justice. You are an abuser of power, and today, you will pay the price. Reynolds looked around, but he knew there was no one left to save him. His lawyer had just been arrested. None of his teammates dared to speak up. And those reporters, they were pointing their cameras at him, recording every moment of his collapse. Judge Kingston looked at Reynolds with heavy eyes. I agree with Detective Carter's request, he said, each word hammering a nail into Reynolds' coffin. The court will hold a separate hearing to consider all charges against Lieutenant David Reynolds. In the meantime, I request that you be held without bail. A shock exploded in Reynolds' head. No, you can't send me to jail. But the judicial police came forward without hesitation and handcuffed him in front of everyone. A second ago, he was a powerful policeman. The next second, he was just a handcuffed criminal in court. All eyes were on Olivia. Some looked at her with respect. Others were still in shock. But everyone understood. Justice was being served. Olivia left the courthouse, taking a deep breath. The air inside was still tense, but she knew that today was a victory, not for herself, but for justice. For those who had been oppressed by those who used their power to trample on others. Outside, the flashbulbs from reporters' cameras continuously flashed, and questions poured toward her. Inspector Carter, can you confirm how many officers were involved in this case? Do you think this is a systemic problem or just an isolated case? What will you do next? Olivia did not answer immediately. She walked down the steps of the courthouse, maintaining a calm and dignified demeanor. Everyone present today, from reporters, citizens to police officers, all looked at her with respect, because she not only exposed the truth but also showed everyone that no one is above the law. On the other side of the courthouse, David Reynolds was being escorted into a police car. His face was still in shock. Once a powerful officer, he was now just a chained criminal. I won't let this go, he roared, thrashing about like a cornered animal. I have rights. I have lawyers. I'm going to sue you all. But none of the police paid him any attention. One of them, a young man, probably new to the force, looked at Reynolds, shaking his head in disappointment. You were someone who could have made a difference, he said, but you chose the wrong path. Reynolds gritted his teeth. Shut up! I'll be back, he shouted. The car door slammed shut, cutting off his desperate screams. And then he was taken away. No more power, no more status. There was only one criminal left, waiting for his day in court. Olivia stood at a distance, watching the car carrying Reynolds leave. But she knew it didn't end here. Reynolds was just a small part of a larger problem. He was not the only one who used his badge to abuse his power and oppress the weak. Back at the Central Police headquarters, Olivia entered her office. Her desk was filled with files. Files on corrupt officers, those who covered up the crimes of their colleagues, those who had damaged the public's trust. She knew well that this system was not easy to change. There were people like Reynolds, but there were also people who were truly dedicated to their profession and truly wanted to protect the community. But if we don't get rid of people like him, good people won't be able to do their jobs. Olivia was not the first to stand up against this corruption, and she certainly wouldn't be the last. That evening, Olivia received a call from her immediate supervisor in the internal audit department. Good job, Carter, a deep voice said through the phone. But do you know what a storm you just stirred up? Olivia smiled slightly. I've never been afraid of storms, sir. There was silence on the other end of the line for a few seconds. Then the other person burst out laughing. I guess so, but be careful. Careful. People like Reynolds may be taken down, but the system has protected them for too long. Others will rise to replace them. Olivia clenched her jaw, her eyes cold. I know, but I have no intention of stopping. She hung up. Outside the window, the city was still lit up, the car lights stretching like streaks of light in the night. A new war was about to begin, but Olivia was ready. She knew she was fighting for what was right, and she would never stop. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your opinion could make a difference. This story shows that no one is above the law, no matter their status. Always stand up for what's right, and remember, the truth always finds a way to the surface. Share this story to inspire others to never back down in the face of injustice.